We're here today to talk about climate change. What causes climate change? CO2. There are both natural and human sources of carbon dioxide emissions. Natural sources include decomposition, ocean release, and respiration. Human sources come from activities like cement production, deforestation, as well as burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. Due to human activities, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has been rising extensively since the Industrial Revolution and has now reached dangerous levels not seen in the last 3 million years. Human sources of carbon dioxide emissions are much smaller than natural emissions, but they have upset the natural balance that existed for many thousands of years before the influence of humans. This is because natural sinks remove around the same quantity of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than are produced by natural sources. This had kept carbon dioxide levels balanced and in safe range, but human sources of emissions have upset the natural balance by adding extra carbon dioxide to the atmosphere without removing any. And now my friend Yanni will tell you some more about CO2 and GMP.
Thank you too. I'd like to talk to you guys about GMP and CO2 and how they counterpart each other. Well, first of all, let's take a background story of GMP and what it is. GMP measures a country's wealthiness by their public services, import and their export. Of course, in many years, we have talked about how GMP can grow without harming the climate. So that's what I want to talk to you guys about. First of all, as you can see on this graph, since the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1750, it has gone uphill. Before we had all the machines, before the nuclear power plants and the big use of coal and oil and all of those limited resources, the CO2 emissions were zero. And that's actually a global goal which we want to achieve in 2150. But at the same time, we can see here the drastic emission that we had from the period since the Industrial Revolution until today. It has gone up almost vertically, which of course isn't a good thing. So yeah, how they counterpart each other. As we can see on these two pictures, what I mean by this equal sign is that by growing our economical stance, by growing the economical growth in a country equals destruction of the world. That's just how it is. Yeah, of course, that's not a good thing, but it's a big disaster if we don't do something about it. Which brings me to the solution, to a puzzle solution of a big first step. Well, as we know, GMP is of course in bystand of the globalization, which is defined as the big transportation that we use nowadays. With a big connection we have between the countries and the big export between all of us, the transportation by land, air, and sea is changing every day for the worse, which is why we have to do something about it. And the first solution for this is of course changing the oil use to electricity instead. Electricity is something that we will have forever, hopefully of course, and it's something that we actually can power our cars with, as we have shown in the last 10 years. Tesla has already blown away the world with their designs and their measurement of their electric cars. But of course, batteries isn't cheap to make. They aren't, of course, eco-friendly to make. But it's a big first step, even though we have to use the CO2 to emission the CO2 to make these batteries. It's in a good shape because it's a one stand time, which means that it's only one time we have to do it. And then, of course, we can see on the graph that the CO2 emissions, of course, will drop down dramatically as we connect every car instead of oil, we use electricity. And if we take a country like Denmark, producing electricity here isn't a big problem when it comes to CO2 emissions, because we have more windmills per citizen than any other country have. And at the same time, we're actually focusing on using the solar panels even more. As we know, the sun is an eco-friendly power source, so why not use it? Now, Dennis will tell you about the consequences that we have experienced until today. Yeah.
The results of climate change we've already seen is, for example, the weather. Climate change has a big impact on weather. As you might have noticed, there's been more hurricanes the past few years, and they've also picked up in intensity. As you can see here, hurricanes is more common now than ever. Flooding is also another example of the consequences. The reason for this is that as we drive more cars and travel more, we pollute the atmosphere with more CO2, and the pollution has steadily increased more and more each year. This graph shows us quite well how there's around 30 million tons more CO2 in the atmosphere than it was in 2005. CO2 is a greenhouse gas. The more CO2, the more heat. So since 1880, the global temperature has increased between 1.1 to 1.4 degrees Celsius. The most drastic increase in temperature was definitely made from 2010 to now, as the temperature did rise around 0.4 degrees. When the global temperature is rising, the ice will melt at the poles, meaning the water level will change. As you can see here, the water is rising and it is going quite fast. The rate now is 3.41 millimeters per year. Even though that doesn't seem like a lot, it can damage our nature and has already done it. Oh yeah, and Amalie will now talk about the future consequences of climate change.
Thank you, Dennis. As you said, I will now talk about the long-term consequences of climate change. Due to the rise in temperature, we will experience the northern and southern poles to melt completely, and that will cause the water levels to rise. That will affect all of us. People living on low land will have to move because of the flooding of their homes. That has a big consequence for all of us due to the lack of resources that we currently have. We will most likely experience disagreement from nations, which will lead to war between the rich and the poor countries, and deaths of many people. This is a very serious consequence. Some countries are already doing a lot to prevent it from happening. They're, for example, building their roads higher from the ground to prevent flooding in the future. If we look at the rise in temperature as to now, we can clearly see the vital impact it has already had on certain species. In the future, we wouldn't have polar bears because due to their lack of food resources. Some bugs and plants will also die because they're highly sensitive to rise in temperature. Not only does the temperature rise, but our overall weather will become more extreme. When the temperature rises, there will be more droughts and heat waves. Our overall weather will become more extreme, and our precipitation patterns will shift. It also causes natural disasters to become more extreme. In an article published by The Guardian, they claim that a hurricane will hit Miami by year 2037 and will knock down whole buildings and flood the city. The water will rise from the underground and all the waste from the sewers will come up to the surface to create a bad stench. This is only one of many tragedies that we can face if we don't change the way we treat our planet. That's all for today. See you later on Chat News.
Sådan.
And now my friend Johnny will tell you some more about CO2 and GMP. Ja, Johnny, du skal ikke gå ind.
Du skal ikke gå ind, din fucking spade. Nu er vi nødt til at tage det igen.
If we look at the rise in temperature as to now, we can clearly,
Clearly. As well as the burning of fossil fuels. Det var fordi, jeg også skulle prøve ikke at sige køjer.
Køj.
Som var ked af det.